Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to finish typing out our store. So here we are inside of our root reducer. Our root reducer, if you hover over it, is already typed for us. It's of the type reducer. It has a combined state as the return of our type, where we have all of our different states that come from our respective reducers. User state, category state, and cart state are all states that we have defined as the returned state of each reducer. So we don't need to type this. What we do need to type, though, is the store.js file. So here, I'm going to convert this over to store.ts. And what we want to do is we want to type out the root state itself, which is the actual values that are contained inside of the actual root reducer. So here I'm going to say export type root state is equal to the return type, because remember, each one of these reducers is just a function. Now, if I just put root reducer here, if I were to get the return type of root reducer, here you'll notice that this is going to give us an issue. It says that root reducer reduces to a value, but is being used as a type here. Did you mean type of root reducer? So root reducer is a function or something that lives in JavaScript. It doesn't live in TypeScript world. It doesn't live in the type world of TypeScript at the very least. We can get the type of it though by using type of like this. Type of gives you the type of whatever you are calling it on. So for us now, when we call type of root reducer, we are getting back that reducer combined state and then of all of our states. So when we get the return type of it, root state will now give us that object that contains all of those values. Now it's an empty object as well, because on initialization, nothing is going to be contained, and then it populates. Once all of our reducers return back with corresponding values, then the root state actually gets built. But the key thing you'll notice is that it is indeed an intersection, but primarily of all of our different states to their corresponding slice keys. Now that we have our root state, we can now start fixing all of the different type issues that we had earlier inside of each of our selector files. So let's go into each selector and let's import in our state value, because this state can now be cast. So I'm going to import in root state from the store file. And now I just say that state points to root state, and there we go. I'm going to copy this over because in each selector file, I'm going to need to do the same thing. And all of these are all in the same relative path of each other. And then the last one is category selector. There we go. Now, honestly, you're watching me go through all these files in this manner because this is pretty much what migrating a project over to TypeScript looks like. Personally, I think migrating a JavaScript project to TypeScript is the best way to learn TypeScript. You don't want to be learning JavaScript and TypeScript at the same time. It's much easier to understand how JavaScript already works inside of your code that you've already written. And then upgrading it to TypeScript is much easier because you can just focus on learning TypeScript. But there we go. We have now fixed those type issues that we were getting from all of our selectors, because now we're coding out the state and giving it the state. So once we have that now, what we need to do is we need to address these remaining issues. So here, first, we notice that this says that property Redux DevTools extension compose does not exist on type window and type of global this. So the window is typed as well, the window object, which the browser gives to us. We want to extend on it. And the way you do that in TypeScript is you first need to declare a global. So you're saying, hey, I want to declare this globally. And what we're going to say is that interface window, which is something that already exists, we are going to add this Redux DevTools. Now, this is going to be an optional key. So we can put question mark, colon, and that just means that it does not have to be there. It might be there, it might not be there. The reason it might be there is because sometimes we load it with the DevTools. It might not be there if the user doesn't have the extension. That's all we're saying. So now that we have this on, what is this going to be? Well, as we know, this DevTool extension gives us a special type of compose. So this is really just a type of the compose function that we get back from Redux anyways. And that will now help us clear this issue that we're getting, which is that it was not being registered. So moving on now. Scrolling down here, we notice that we have a type error with our middlewares. We see that argument of type false or middleware is not assignable to the parameter of type middleware. Type boolean is not assignable to type middleware. And the reason for this is because apply middlewares is only expecting middlewares inside. If you look at this middlewares array, the reason this is happening is because here our process env check to see if it's in production mode or not. Because of the double ampersand, we could end up with a false value, meaning that if this evaluates to false, we won't even bother evaluating the rest of the statement. Now, even though this value will be false, we will filter it out with our Boolean check. The problem is that Typescript does not know that by filtering out whatever is truthy or falsy, this middleware will narrow its type down to middleware. All it knows is that there's a chance that whatever this filters through, it may just still be some Boolean value. And this is where we essentially need to tell Typescript exactly what this filter is doing. Listen, if you pass the truthiness of this check inside of the filter, then you are for sure left with a middleware, because anything that's falsy is going to get stripped out. This is the perfect time to use what we already know, which is our type predicate functions. So we need to first import in that middleware type so that we can then utilize it in order to actually narrow the type once it passes through our check. So for this Boolean, I'm going to actually write the callback. So we know we're getting some middleware. And now we're going to narrow the type using what we know. We're going to say if middleware passes, then its middleware is going to be of the type middleware. And then we'll pass the actual middleware parameter into this Boolean check. And now if you hover over middleware, it will know. Whatever comes through and passes that filter must be of type middleware through this predicate type. So there we go. We'll notice that our error is gone. Now, one other thing we want to tighten up is this persist config. If you hover over it, you notice that it is of this type object, key of string, storage of web storage, whitelist is a string array. Now, we only want to whitelist values inside of our root state. So what we can do is we can extend upon the existing persist config. Now, from Redux persist, there is a persist config object. This is a type that contains all of the existing values that actually exist inside of a persist config. So whatever values you can actually pass to it. So we just want to extend upon this. So we'll say type extended persist config is equal to persist config of the root state. So this will pass that through. And what we also want for this persist config is we want to now narrow down through an intersection what the whitelist can contain. So we want the whitelist to only contain an array of the keys of the root state. So key of will get you back only those values inside of root state, the key values, which are of course the only values that we want to pass here. And now we can say that persist config is of type extended persist config. And now if you hover over, you'll notice that what does it say inside of persist config? Well, the whitelist value can only contain user, categories, and cart. And that's what we get from using this extended persist config. And just like that, we have now typed out all of our store TS. We have resolved all of those other issues that we saw, and we've also fixed up our middleware. So a lot of this is just practice. Once you look at these errors and these type errors, and you just really think about what it is, through the tools that we've learned, we're probably going to now be able to cover 80-90% of any new additional type errors we come across. And that's the advantage of really using Typescript to narrow down and understand what it is each of these parts of our JavaScript code is trying to do, particularly Redux. Now that we're done typing out our store, in that next video, we'll learn how to type our own custom middlewares. I'll see you in the next video.